but we will see the details. I'm first going to talk a little bit about the background. Why am I even interested in that? Then we're going to look at some code somewhat interactively, and this will be the main part of the talk, I suppose. So, what am I working on? So a little bit of background, short motivation, maybe also a bit of a disclaimer, because all that we're going to see is tailored very much towards the purpose that you're going to see here. I'm working with something called existential rules, and the chase, it's not important what it really is, but rules look something like this. This is just logical implications, and it says something like if you have an Rxy, then there should exist a z such that you have Rxz or you have Ryx. So given a logical fact, RAB, for example, we can apply this rule to try to satisfy it, introducing new elements, and basically this will give us a tree of possible worlds that we can consider. Don't mind the example too much, it's just giving us some kind of tree, right? This is the important part. So if you're thrown off by this rule, then don't worry about it. But basically what we can do is, because of the existential, we can introduce new elements on some infinite path that is going along the very bottom right here. And for reasons that are maybe a bit beyond the scope of this talk, I want to formalize the basics of this chase algorithm and existential rules, just basically because I work with it. And it's nice to have stuff properly formalized. And this kind of motivated me to, well, formalize infinite trees of finite degree in the first place. And now you might say, well, why don't you just use an inductive definition? But maybe you already know why I'm not using an inductive definition. But we could very well define binary trees in an inductive fashion, right? Either we just get a leaf node, or we get some label for the node together with two other binary trees, which we can turn into a tree. Well, that's fine. This gives us binary trees, but only finite ones, because the inductive definitions in Lean always give us least fixed points, right? So all the trees that we get out of that are necessarily finite. In a way, at least the way I always think about this as an intuition is, this is giving us the smallest possible set of all trees that adhere to this construction. So first of all, we get all possible leaves. There's no way around that. And then once we have all possible leaves, we can combine two of them together with a new label into a new tree. Then we can use this to construct something new, but we always only do this if we really have to. So all that we get out of there is indeed finite. It's ever increasing, right? We get trees of arbitrary depth, but they are all finite. So what we need to formalize infinite trees is actually some kind of co-inductive definition. At least it would be something that we need, which corresponds to the greatest fixed point, right? Then we would basically also get the infinite trees, which we can decompose by either of the two constructors. Okay, but there's a catch, because Lean doesn't have co-inductive definitions, at least not as first-class citizens. Some other interactive theorem provers, I think Coq, for example, allow this. I never played around with that, but I've seen that there's a co-inductive keyword there, for example. But we don't have that. So we are going to do this a little bit differently. And look at some code in 5 steps. And if you want to follow along even more interactively, you can visit this link, which redirects you to some GitHub repo, which you can clone, and then you can try to fill in some sorries, which is also what I'm going to do next. Okay, so we will start very simple. Actually, most of this will be very simple. We first of all look at the possible definition for infinite lists, not even trees, just infinite lists, also known as streams, I think, in Mathlib. Then we will turn this definition into lists which are not necessarily infinite, but possibly infinite. And then we will use this idea that we use there to define infinite trees, and then continue with possibly infinite trees of finite degree. Finally, we will take a small glimpse at how to prove König's lemma, or at least a special case of it, for those kinds of trees. And if you don't recall König's lemma, maybe let me put it right here. At least the special case that we're trying to show is that if each branch of such a tree is finite, then there is only finitely many branches in the tree. And actually, we're going to show the other way around. So we are assuming that there's infinitely many branches, and then we will construct one branch that is infinite out of that. And the idea for that is actually not too hard, but I think I'm coming back to this once we're there. So let's, this is the GitHub repo. Nothing too fancy here, but you could clone it if you want, but you don't have to. You can just watch me type. So I'm cloning it. Oops. Yes, looks good. I'm Mr. Fancy Pants using some kind of Nix-based setup, so I have to run this, and now I can open step 1 ideally. Okay. Not too much here. I hope this is big enough. Otherwise, please cry out to me. So first of all, how could we define an infinite list? Well, an infinite list in our setting is just a list. It's just a function from the naturals into the desired type. Right? So we basically we have an address for each element, right? And the address is just a natural number with starting at 0 because we're computer scientists. At least I am. Sorry. Yes, and then we can play around with this, right? For example, we can define a method take on that, which just takes the first n elements and puts them into a finite list, right? And well, for fun, I'm just going to do that. And I'm going to be a little more fancy than that and write it like this, because then I don't have to write match, so I can avoid some symbols that I would have to type otherwise. If we take 0 elements out of the infinite list, we just return the empty list. And if we take the successor of n elements out of that list, we just take n elements out of the list. And then we take the one at the position that corresponds to the successor of n, which is L of n, because we're 0-based, if I'm not wrong. And we can verify that this works by this small evaluation, and this looks indeed correct. If we take a very simple infinite list, which is the ID function, so it just maps every natural number to itself, right? Take the first 3 elements, then we get 0 till 2. So far, so good. And for good measure, let's prove that the length of the take function is actually the number of elements that we take, but this is easy by induction on n. And then we do simp with the definition. And then we do simp a with the definition. Good so far. Should I go faster? Okay. Cool. And this works. Questions so far? Otherwise, we're at step 2, which is still easy. Okay. Let's define possibly infinite lists. And for this, well, we're going to do something which is maybe obvious. We're just going to take an infinite list of options of the desired type, which is maybe a bit brittle at first sight, because we could get very malformed things there, right? We could get something like 3, none, 2, none, 7, 8, none, none, 9. We don't want that. So we add a proof to the structure and say that this thing shouldn't have any holes. So it should just be a list, possibly infinite, of natural numbers, and then infinitely many nonce, or even no none if the list of natural numbers is already infinite. So we just say that for all n, if the infinite list at step n is not none, then for all things that come before that, right, which is say for all m, which is a fin n, then infinite list of m, well, is also not none. This should be what I want, I think. Cool. And this gives us then somewhat well-formed, possibly infinite lists. And for fun, we could now define a possibly infinite list, which is always empty, which is just taking the infinite list, which always returns none. And then we need to provide the proof that this is no holes. But I think this is just this just works like this, right? Because we have one thing in there which pretty much says, I think it's the A dagger here, which just says that none is not equal to none, but this is obviously not true. Okay, cool. And then we can just check what this does and use our empty, possibly infinite list and take the first 5 elements out of that, and well, we get 5 times none. Okay, so far so good. Questions about lists? Then we can finally go to trees. So based on what you saw, do you have an idea of how to get an infinite tree? Not even a possibly infinite tree, just an infinite tree. At least that's not what I'm aiming at.
Lists of infinite lists, right?
Oh, that would be an option. I actually once tried to formalize this, but this is awful to work with. There's a okay. I thought this was more obvious, but I'm glad it's not.
How about infinite list of nets as a function from infinite list of nets to the thing you?
Oh, that's good. But it's already enough if we take a function from a finite list of nuts to the desired type.
That's right.
Yes. Very good. Yeah. So but it's the same intuition as for the infinite list. Because for the infinite list, we just said, okay, we map from the address of an element to the element. And now we again map from the address of an element to the element. But now the address of an element in an infinite tree is a finite list of natural numbers, kind of marking which branch you take for each of the nodes. Yes. And actually, I didn't see this myself for a long while that this is possible, but thanks to a brief discussion with a student, this kind of idea kind of struck our minds, and this works, at least for my use cases, quite nicely. Okay. And well, now we maybe want to define something like the children for a node given by its address. So the node is identified by a list of natural numbers. And now we want to get its infinite list of children, right? Because this tree is not really always infinite. Each node also has infinitely many children. And this infinite list, remember, this is a function taking a natural number and returning an element, can be defined as we just take the value of the tree at the address, which is n prepended to node. We take the addresses right to left here because it's easier to prepend to a list than to append to it. At least that feels somewhat more natural. I can show you a picture for that to make this more clear. So this could be some tree that we're defining. It's actually already going one step further. But just to showcase the addresses, the root node would have the address empty list. Then its first child would have the address list with 0. And its second child has the list starting from the right with 0 and then 1. Okay? And well, similarly for the other ones. Okay. Yeah, and besides children, because eventually we want to talk about König's lemma somehow, we are also going to define a set of infinite lists, which kind of shall represent all the branches going through the tree, but only picking the labels that occur. This is maybe a bit of a peculiar definition, as I noticed later, but fortunately for what I wanted to do with it, it's good.
The statement of the lemma, you don't really need to know the node type. It's all about the shapes of the trees, right?
Yes and no, because we're going to show the lemma for this peculiar branch definition, and then we kind of need it for this infinite tree. The lemma wouldn't be super interesting anyway, because the tree is just always infinite, has infinitely many branches, which are all infinitely long. But eventually we are interested in this in the branches on the possibly infinite trees of finite degree with this peculiar branch definition. But I admit this.
Yeah, but still, the type of the labels doesn't matter. So you're first defining a type of addresses, and then you say now the tree are maps from addresses to values.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but for the shape of the tree, the values are irrelevant.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So the type doesn't matter at all. Yeah. 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 Sorry if I got it wrong. All right. So I think I'm going to copy that because it's a bit lengthier and maybe not so interesting, and we can spend some more time somewhere else. So I'm cheating a bit, but I will explain at least what it does. Okay. So we're taking a set of branches, right? So we're just having a function that takes a potential branch and returns a prop. And we just want to say that there exists an infinite list of natural numbers, which kind of identifies the branch through the tree, which, when we take appropriate nodes from the tree, actually matches the branch that we're looking at. And because we want only the branches that go through a certain node, we want this infinite list of natural numbers to agree with the node that we're interested in on the first node length natural numbers. Yeah.
So, like in the definition of infinite tree using this list of natural numbers, like some are not going to be valid trees, right?
So far the trees are not possibly infinite, but always infinite. So every node in the tree has a value. Each node has infinitely many children. Each of them have values. But yeah, if we just gonna use options on that, a lot of this is not going to be valid, just like for the list, which is where we're going at. So good question. All right. Yes. So let's continue right away. And we now want to turn this into possibly infinite trees. And I'm gonna go back to the picture because for the list, things were still pretty simple, right? We just wanted to make sure that there's no holes in the list. But now there's another thing. We, on one hand, don't want to have holes in the list of children of a node, but we also don't want any node to be an orphan. So every node in the tree should have a parent. We shouldn't have this kind of malformedness. And I think those two conditions should be enough. So again, we just take our infinite tree skeleton that we just defined and now use it over options. And now for the no orphans, for time reasons, I think I'm going to copy that as well. We say that for every node path, if the node at this address is not none, then for all of its ancestors, which is given by another list of natural numbers such that this list can be extended into the address of the current node. We also find that the node at this position is not none. And the no holes in children thing works the same as for the possibly infinite list, so this is not too interesting. And now we can again define the children for this possibly infinite node in this possibly infinite tree, which is actually very convenient. So I'm going to show it to you. This is a possibly infinite list, so we need to have an infinite list, but for this we can just take the children function that we already defined from the infinite tree, use that, and then we still need to prove that this list doesn't have any holes. But this, if I didn't make any mistakes, is exactly, it is not. Because I need to supply node. Yes, now it is. Cool. Okay, and branches through, and this is where things get a little bit peculiar now, is defined just as the branches. I'm sorry, the branches are now possibly infinite lists, right? Branches can now be finite. So I'm taking a potential branch and I just ask if the infinite list part, if this branch of this branch is contained in the branches of the underlying infinite tree. Does it somehow make sense? can nod or shake your head. Doesn't make sense. Okay. What I get why this is a bit off-putting maybe is that those branches are in a sense not necessarily maximal, or not necessarily maximal paths. For example, the possibly infinite list, which is always none, is a branch for every such tree. Basically, we can terminate branches early and they would still be valid branches for us, but we will also get all the branches which correspond to maximal paths with that. Does that make more sense or still not? Okay. And this is good enough for us, I suppose, because in the end, when we show König's lemma for those kinds of branches, it will just get a little bit stronger, I suppose. But I have it on my to-do list to rework this branch definition to be a little more useful for the general case and not just for my particular application. Oh. Okay. And to get finally to a possibly infinite tree of finite degree, we now just also demand that for each node there exists a k such that the kth child of this particular node is none. Something like this, hopefully. That looks all right. Right, we're just saying, okay, at some point, you don't have any children anymore. And I think in the original definition that I'm using, I'm also demanding this k to be the minimal k just for convenience reasons. But I think you could just show if there exists such a k, then there also exists a minimal k that has this property. Right, just to not make any mistakes here, I'll make sure that this works. The children definition is a little more tricky now. And now we want to really get a finite list of children for each node, right? Because we have a finite degree for the tree. And this is itself not so hard, but it is fitting nicely to the first talk that we saw today, because we have to use some well-founded recursion to show that this thing terminates.
Question.
Yes.
Is the type system of mean rich enough to so that you could have parameterized the tree by the type constructor that gives you the children? So you could have had an infinite list, or you could now you restrict it to a finite list.
That's interesting. I could imagine that I could, just thinking from a programmer's point of view, maybe I could define a type class which I call collection.
Because
So,
the binary trees is just the trees over the pair functor.
That's what you mean. So maybe this works. I can't tell for sure, honestly. I'm lacking some of the foundational knowledge that would be required to answer this thoroughly, but it sounds like it could work. Yeah. Yes. Okay, back to the children definition. We just have a small loop. And what we do is just we start with the first element of the possibly infinite list of children. And then we just take the next element until we reach none. And then we stop. And now we just need to prove to Lean that this indeed terminates. But we can do this by giving a termination measure where we classically choose the k that we have here, and then just say that k minus the step that we're at gets smaller. And well, the proof determination hint for this is a little lengthy, but this might just be me not being able to write this more cleanly. Not too interesting. Cool. And the branches are just, the branch definition is just piped through again from the tree from the outside. So now I think we are ready. And yeah, there's an example here, which I think I'm not going to go into. You good? Nice. Okay. So step 5. And there's a lot of sorries here and a lot of, I think the first 2 proofs would be pretty big. I'm not going into those. We want to prove König's lemma now, well, some variant of it. So we want to say that if for all branches in a given tree, we find some step in that branch which is none. So if all branches in the tree are finite, if you will, then the set of all branches in the tree is also finite. And maybe I should say I'm having a simple definition of finiteness for sets, which just says that a set is finite if and only if there exists a list which contains exactly the elements of the set, which makes things a little more easier for my case. And we're, as I hinted at earlier, I think we're going to show this by contradiction. So we are going to assume that there's infinitely many branches in the tree, and we will construct one infinite branch out of that. So one branch which is never none. Okay, and for this, we need to give an infinite list of naturals, which kind of marks the infinite path through the tree. And that's basically the main ingredient that we need. So we just have a small helper thing here, which tells us that such a branch exists. And I'm not going to fill all the gaps here, but one essential ingredient is that we have a intermediate result, which tells us that for each depth of the tree, we can find a node which has infinitely many paths going, infinitely many branches going through it. Because we already know that the tree in total has infinitely many branches, which means infinitely many branches go through the root node. But this means, because the tree has finite degree, that there needs to be one child of the root node, which has infinitely many branches going through it, and so on and so forth. And we can, by that, track a path in the tree which has this property. And for this, we're just going to call one of our helper functions, which is getting the infinite branching node for the depth. And the rest is a bit technical. This is giving us an address of a node, and we're just taking the first element. And I'm not going to prove that this first element really exists. But maybe, I think time is running a bit short as well, right? So I'm going to keep this crisp. The definition of this is not a theorem, but a non-computable definition, which is maybe not the best way of doing things, but one that worked for me, and I didn't see a better way of doing it, but maybe you will have ideas, so we'd be happy to discuss afterwards. But basically, I need to somehow pick one node for each depth of the tree, right? And I also want these nodes to kind of depend on the previous pick. And the easiest way I saw for doing this would be to just have a non-computable definition, which always classically chooses one particular node, which I can then extend downwards. And I think this is also specifically necessary because later on I need to build this function which for each natural number really assigns one of these nodes, right? I think this is the crucial part where I really don't get around this non-computable definition. But once we have that, we can finish the proof, have our infinite list of natural numbers, which marks our path. We can make this into a proper branch and then conclude the proof for König's lemma. If you feel adventurous, you can try to fill in the gaps yourself. Of course, you can take a hint or take multiple hints from the finished formalization that I have in another repo, which should be linked, and try to attempt this at home. And without confusing you any further, hopefully, I think it's time to conclude. I'm very happy that you had me here. And I would be happy to get any kind of feedback on formalizations that I did, maybe also afterwards. If you take a look at this at home, feel free to reach out to me. And yeah, thanks again. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe it's worth to put into context. I think König's lemma is quite an important foundational thing because it's kind of a weak axiom of choice, isn't it?
I think at least
that's where this non-computable thing comes from.
I did a bit of reading. I think in the proof wiki it said that the axiom of that König's lemma requires some weaker variant of the axiom of choice. I don't remember the exact name. Yeah, which is also why I'm was kind of happy in the end with just using the non-computable definition, because I think at some point I need to classically choose some particular representatives. Yeah.
There's also some, I guess, equivalent formulations with finite, non-finite. So like every infinite tree of finite degree must have an infinite path.
Yes.
Things like that.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I think this is pretty, I mean, terms and conditions apply here, right? But this is pretty much the contrapositive that we're trying to show, yeah. But thanks for the remark about the axiom, yeah.
Anything else?
So you said you are proving a special case of König's lemma. How much more difficult would the general case be? I have no idea what the general statement is.
Yes, I think looking through Mathlib, I found a very, very general version, which honestly I didn't quite grasp what it was stating. So for me, König's lemma pretty much is what I stated on the slide. But apparently it looked like there might be more general versions of it. That's why I tried to be on the safe side by saying it's a special case. Yeah.
Coming back to parameterizing on the kind of branching, are trees the free monad over the branch functor?
I'm sorry, I wouldn't know that.
So that's how you would do it in languages that do support co-recursion.
All right.
Or co-inductive definitions.
Probably you're right about this. Yeah. Yeah, for the whole formalization approach, I kept very close to definitions that we would also use in the literature around existential rules and the chase, which is what I'm most familiar with. Yeah. So.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot, Lukas.
Welcome.